I just thought I'd do a quick intro because I think you both deserve to be introduced. I think so, Katarina. So you have a pretty epic background within journalism. You've been SVT, if I'm not mistaken, and quite a long career within Break It. And now you've launched this podcast, Techsplain, interviewing game changers in the tech world. And Mike, hello. Has it been at Slush? Has it been heavy?
It's been fantastic at Slush. Yeah, it's been a very interesting event. You know, obviously we're living in different times now, but everyone's been very safe and it's fantastic.
That's good. I've been very jealous. I've been jealous of all the lack of karaoke and stuff this year. I've been dealing with UPPSTART. But as a quick intro, I mean, Mike doesn't really need much introduction, but Mike Butcher from TechCrunch, one of the most well-known names, I would say, in the journalism tech world. So thank you so much for coming along. We're going to kick off this session now. So I'll hand over to Katarina, who's going to moderate. And lovely to have you both here.
Thank you so much, Jason. And we're going to get right into it because this session is about how to get journalists to publish my news. And both me and Mike, we are approached a lot by people in tech, by entrepreneurs with new ideas, innovators that wants us to write about them. And this session, we're going to tell you what we like and what we don't like, and maybe that can help you to do the right approach and actually get someone to publish your news. Mike, I want to start with you because you have such a long experience of this, and you're also a profile and very well known. So what's the worst that happened to you when somebody tried to kind of sell you the news that they wanted you to print?
Well, I think that it's entrepreneurs, obviously, for obvious reasons, want to get covered in the tech press. And in particular, I think TechCrunch has become very much a talisman of the technology entrepreneurial world. I regularly hear from venture capitalists that they don't really look at startups unless they've appeared in TechCrunch, actually, often. So that's one thing, and I think that makes entrepreneurs sometimes a little bit borderline desperate to get coverage. It means that some strange things sometimes happen. For instance, that I've been pitched startups in the men's room, in the toilet, at the urinal. I've been pitched by entrepreneurs who follow me into cubicles in the toilet. I've been pitched by entrepreneurs sitting next to me on planes. Who realize who I am and then start to pitch me for a 3-hour flight somewhere. I've been pitched in walking along the street with the person not going away, deciding to carry on walking with me for at least half an hour. So it means that all sorts of interesting things happen, and I fully understand it. It means that often getting coverage can be very useful for entrepreneurs and for startups.
But of course, it's important to get you to listen, right? And to follow you to the toilet or on a flight, talking and talking and talking might not be the best approach. So you were talking about borderline desperate, that people are borderline desperate. But how can you do this and not appear as you're desperate and stalking someone who's like you, who's a journalist? What would you say is the first thing to do?
I mean, I think that one of the big mistakes that entrepreneurs often make, and it happens a lot actually, and it's funny because people are not really aware that they're doing it, is that they pitch their company and their product first, rather than describing the problem they're trying to solve. And I think one of the key things is that it's getting coverage, especially in the tech press, is if you get the journalist interested in what you're doing, you can do that by describing the problem and the problem you're trying to solve, and you can it doesn't even if you can convince the journalist that what you're solving is significant, then they're more likely to take an interest in what you're doing. Many times, most of the time, often they just describe what they're actually doing. what they're doing actually isn't nearly as interesting as the problem they're trying to solve in many ways. Once you hear about the problem and how difficult it is, that's when you understand the scope of what they're trying to do. Sure, the product, I'm sure, is often, you know, interesting as well, if it's trying to solve a very difficult problem. But really, I think you should start with the problem first, and give it good context to what you're doing. It's very hard to go in cold and just hear about a product straight away.
I think we as journalists, a lot of times we think that techies actually suck on communications, because that's what we are good at, right? We are trained in storytelling and communicating, and that's why you sometimes get really irritated and tired. You know, my mailbox can be full with people who wants to pitch me stuff, but sometimes it feels like a cliche. You have to know as an entrepreneur that everybody wants to democratize something or revolutionize something. It's a cliche, and it comes up over and over again. And what happens when you get those cliches in your mailbox, Mike? Do you kind of put them aside immediately? So well, is there a tip to try something else, another approach?
Yes, Katarina, you've absolutely nailed it. There are a lot of words which are very much overused in startup pitches. People are trying to change the world, make the world a better place, revolutionize, democratize. The word democratize has been completely overused now. I can't. It's actually becoming quite laughable how often it's used. And the problem with that is that if you are using these cliches, that actually stands in the way of you actually explaining what you're doing in a more sort of coherent manner. And I think also it's off-putting to journalists because they hear these phrases so often that it makes you quite cynical and skeptical about a company if they use these phrases over and over again, which are very, very common. So it's much better, as I said before, describe the problem, use your own language to describe what you're doing, and to stay away from these cliches, because they'll simply slow down the process of a journalist getting to understand what you're doing.
Yeah, and I also think it's important for entrepreneurs to understand that journalists are trained in the fact that we never, and it's kind of forbidden for journalists to write something which is going to be a commercial for a company, for example, because the main thing that we should do is actually to do what do you call it? Investigative journalism. That's the nicest journalism that people win prizes for, and so on and so forth. So we are trained in the fact that we don't like to make a piece that come off as commercial for a company. It's much better for journalists to write about a problem or something that is wrong. You know, when someone like Frances Haugen shows up and she has leaked documents, that's like a dream for journalists, right? Because then you can dig into a problem that a big company has, and then you're gonna be a well-known journalist. You're gonna win prizes for that, because that's important work, right? So if you just want us to write the positive things, it's going to be harder. That's what I'm saying, because we are trained in not doing that. And what we want to do, and I'm pretty harsh here, we want the big scoop, right? And that's why I think what Mike is saying about what problem are you solving, that's so important, because then you have something that is a problem. You have some kind of conflict. You have something that is not so comfortable, right? And that becomes naturally much more interesting for for a journalist. Don't you agree, Mike, with that?
Well, I think it's very rare to have an event like Frances Hagen, who is a whistleblower for Facebook. I should think probably not of the time, companies don't want to have that kind of publicity. That's very adverse publicity for Facebook. And this is a very sort of unusual event. This person. Technology startups are ultimately trying to do something which I call educate the world. They're trying to educate the world about what the problem is they're trying to solve, how they're trying to solve it in a very unique manner. I often say that 50% of being an entrepreneur is about education. You are trying to educate the market with what you're doing. You're trying to educate the market to the extent that the problem you're solving is significant and important, and so significant and important, in fact, that that only your company can solve it. Only your company is deserving and worthy of raising funding from venture capital or from angel investors. So education is incredibly important, actually. So using that kind of very highly communicative language, being able to tell your story, learning how to pitch, learning three or four different versions of your pitch. Perhaps the first version is a very sort of quick pitch, about 30 seconds long. The second version is a little bit longer, maybe a couple of minutes. The next version is maybe 5 minutes longer. The next version is 10 minutes longer with slides. The next version is an investor pitch. The next version is a pitch to the media. And so, often I find the most successful entrepreneurs can describe what they're doing very, very quickly, very easily, and in literally in one sentence. So I think it's practicing is really, really important. Practicing in front of the mirror, practicing with friends or colleagues or advisors, getting your message across. It's so important, because if you can't communicate what you're doing, it's going to be much harder to both raise funding and also to talk to the media, and also just to talk to anyone about what you're doing. So getting that pitch down in a very, very sort of succinct manner is incredibly important. We're very familiar with the Brexit debate here in the UK, and that was devised by a communication genius called Dominic Cummings. I'm not a fan of Brexit, I might add. I think it's a bad idea. But one of the clever things about it was that it shrunk its messaging into just 3 words: take back control. And then after the election, we had called get Brexit done. 3 words, boom, that's it. And I think if you can shrink your messaging as a company down into these very, very small messages, small items of communication, it really, really helps what you're doing. But I'm not a fan of Brexit, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, so in the sense that you have to be a good communicator to get your ideas and through, do you think, Mike, that it's good for even early on startups to take in some help from communicators to help them wrap this message? Is it worth it, do you think?
Well, often I say that if you're it's very hard often for early stage startups to get communications help, because it costs money. So communications professionals, PR people, will charge you a reasonable amount of money. That's their business to do that. So really, the best way to do it, I mean, you're going to have to bounce your ideas around with people who have no clue what you're working on, and that will help you hone your messaging. Often I also say to entrepreneurs is that they should read the media. They should read the technology press. They don't have to do it religiously, but certainly it really helps to check in with what's going on in your sector on a regular basis. Brainstorm with your team about your messaging. Brainstorm stories, new stories that might be relevant to your sector and your company. These really help you get your message across, and they're very simple. It's very simple to do. So I think those, just reading the news, checking in on your sector, brainstorming your team, bouncing your messaging and your pitch off people who don't know what you do, means that it'll make you better as an entrepreneur. It'll make you more rigorous in your thinking about what you're doing. And so those are some sort of small pieces of advice I would say. Obviously, if you are able to afford it, you'll at some point you'll be able to get communications professionals help. But it's not totally necessarily, and I don't think, certainly at the early stage, it's not really advisable to have PR help unless you can genuinely afford it, because obviously it costs money.
I also want to bring up something comforting to all the entrepreneurs out there, that it's oftentimes a personality, right? That approaches you. I mean, of course, it's a person, but it can also be that person that you get really interested in, because the person have it all, like have that shine, and you might be not very experienced in approaching journalists, but it's not only to be full on 100% professional and have that great pitch down always, because you can also thrive on just your passion and your personality. That's what I find when I speak to entrepreneurs that approaches me, and that's on a personal level often. I mean, now we haven't had so many events where you actually meet people, but I think it's an honor, and it's so much fun and so much positive stuff about entrepreneurs, and that's why I love to be in this beat and report on this. You guys are people with ideas, and actually you are changing the world with a lot of those ideas. So I think also that when it comes from within, that I'm really passionate about what I do, and I really believe in my own idea, then that can shine through. Don't you think, Mike, that we get attracted by that too sometimes?
I think that yeah, I think it does help actually to get across your passion about what you're doing. If you sound relaxed about it, then it means that somebody's going to think, oh well, maybe what the problem you're solving isn't that interesting, or that that big a deal. So actually, sort of sounding enthusiastic about what you do does help. Being a little, if you're super relaxed about it, then maybe I don't care that much. So you're going to have to kind of enthuse people about what you're doing, because at the end of the day, remember, you're dealing with somebody who doesn't know that the problem you're solving with your company and your startup is a big deal. So if you sound nonchalant about the whole thing, then it's not going to get across that what you're doing is something significant. So I think that does really help, actually.
But let's get down to the nitty-gritty here, because most of the entrepreneurs, Mike, are not going to meet you in person, have that opportunity. And the way to reach out to you is, of course, through social media or emails. So some hands-on advice here. Which is the best way to reach out to journalists, do you think? And is it social media or email or phone?
But definitely not phone, because cold calling a journalist is a kind of a no-no. They're busy people. They've got a lot to do. They have a lot of incoming already. And if you cold call a journalist, they're really going to be a little bit annoyed potentially. So I think what you need to do is you need to cover off some basics, and you need to keep it short and sweet. So instead of sending a War and Peace, a huge novel, several 24 pages of a PDF, you need to keep it succinct and short and sweet. And so you should say, hi, Mike, we are launching this company. It's solving this problem. This is how we're solving it. it's going to compete with these guys. It's better than those guys because blah, blah, blah. We've raised this much money from these investors. Would you like to write about it? It's an exclusive or whatever it is. Here's some more. Here's a link to more information. Press release, photographs of the product, photographs of the founder. Bang. That's it. You're done. And that all of a sudden now I know exactly what your company does, what the problem it's solving, why it might be relevant, who it's competing against, why it's a big deal potentially. And you've sent me some link to more information or other news stories about what you're doing or whatever it is. You have not sent me an enormous 10 gigabyte photograph of yourself sitting at a desk. You have not sent me an enormous PowerPoint pitch slide deck that I'm not going to read. You have kept it short and sweet, and now I know what to do and whether or not I'm going to cover you or not.
But how do you make that email pop? Do you write something special in the message row?
I think
subject.
The subject line is actually incredibly important because journalists don't really read all of their email, because if they'd sat down and read all their email, they'd never get any work done. So that subject line is really important. Just saying hi, or would you like to, can I interest you in this or something, is just too general. You want to kind of describe what you're doing literally in one sentence and make that the subject line, I think, in many ways. But also the news, what is happening that's new. Just because you exist doesn't make you a news story. Just literally existing a company is not news. What you're actually doing new is news. What is happening to your company that is new is news. So just existing is not news.
Right. And I would say too that after a while, when you built that successful startup into a big company, then the power is going to be different. Then we are going to try to get interviews with you, and your press people are going to stop us and delay us, and you don't want to talk to us. Can we just touch on that just for fun, Mike? How do you work when you need to get in touch with a company that doesn't want to have, when you have to struggle for the attention?
Well, it's relatively rare because often companies do want to get press. The times when companies don't want to get press is usually because something's going wrong. But it's not very advisable to ignore journalists. If they're calling you, the fact that you're not talking to them is usually a signal that something bad is going on, something wrong is happening. So it's always advisable to pick up the phone if the journalist calls, or get back to them quickly with a response, with a statement, whatever it is. It's much better to engage with the media than it is to disengage or to ignore them.
And I think sometimes also as an entrepreneur, you have to think that even, if the journalist finds what you're telling interesting and wants to do an interview, you're gonna get critical questions. You're gonna get questions that are hard too, as well. And you have to be prepared for that. And you can't react with kind of anger or being a little bit insulted because you get hard questions. You have to know that that's part of the work we do. We need to ask the hard questions as well. So Mike, when you ask hard questions, and what do you expect? Because that could be interesting to know for an entrepreneur.
Well, I think I want to kind of I think, like as I said, one of the problems that you've got as an entrepreneur is you're trying to communicate. You're kind of trying to communicate something new. You're talking to a journalist who is not an expert on what you do. So it really does help to in order to boil down what you're doing in a kind of a bite-sized manner. Writing, the huge long emails, that doesn't really work particularly. So being succinct, getting that. I often also like entrepreneurs who are experts in their subject. One of the interesting ways of engaging with the media is that you've got to remember that all journalists are on Twitter. They use Twitter as a medium. Certainly, we do in Western media. If you hear from an entrepreneur on Twitter, if they reply to you, if they use social media in an intelligent way to describe what they're doing, or to show that they have expertise on a subject, that's more likely that they will become a source of stories. So you won't necessarily end up hearing about the company in the sense that, you know, there's a big, you know, article about the company. But if that entrepreneur is an expert on something, perhaps it could be crypto or the metaverse or climate tech or fintech or SaaS or whatever. If you hear that from that entrepreneur regularly and you realize that they are an expert, you're more likely to get into the press because you're considered to be an expert on something. So engaging on, if you do engage on things like, you know, social media or LinkedIn or Twitter, then you will the more likely the journalist will sort of take notice of you. Obviously, do that within reason. Don't go overboard. There's no point in being the reply guy, as it were, on social media. But if there's something relevant or there's a news story about it, that news story about the subject that you're an expert on, then it's perfectly valid to comment or to mention or to send a quick email saying you know, you have a comment on a news story. So that's also a good way of engaging with the media.
I think that's a key takeaway from this session. Also be interesting outside just talking about your company, because you have a lot of knowledge about a specific beat. So engage in the debate when it's suitable and when you have something to say, and then you're going to be noticed, and then your company is going to be more interesting. So that was a really smart point, Mike. Do we have any questions, Mike, in the Q&A that we should answer, or you should answer the last few minutes? You can put questions to Mike there if you like. Do you see anything right now, Mike? I'm on it. I'm on the app, so I can't see anything.
No problem. Let's have a look.
Let's have a look.
Let me see if there's some pictures. Which platforms should we typically use? This is from Sarah. I mean, oddly enough, people think that email doesn't work, but I think it does. And one of the reasons it works is that you can nudge, you can bump the email. So if the journalist doesn't reply, you know, immediately or in 24 hours, you can resend the email, forward it again, reply to the email, say, "Hi, just checking you saw this," and you can do it more than once, and it doesn't annoy me because it's just my email, right? If you are trying to message a journalist on Twitter and you keep replying, then that becomes kind of intrusive. So oddly enough, the email does kind of work because you can bump the email higher up every kind of, you know, day or half day, whatever, and just to make sure that they've seen it. And it's not that hard to do. There's another question here from Julia. What do you think about using LinkedIn as a platform to contact journalists for the first time? Katarina, what do you think about
that? I hate it because it says always, "Hi, Katarina, can I share some information with you?" And I don't know. I don't get turned on by it. That's it. I think we need a smarter way than LinkedIn. And I understand that LinkedIn is the professional network and everything, but it's still something more interesting than just, can I tell you about this? I don't get turned on by it. What about you?
I agree. I think LinkedIn is a terrible way to pitch journalists. I'm actually rarely in LinkedIn because it's full of spam from recruiters or from crazy, irrelevant companies that don't have anything to do with what I do. LinkedIn really, you know, if you're going to use LinkedIn, it's really as a place for, like, you know, recruiting or, you know, professional networking, of course. But it's not really a great place to pitch journalists. I'm just not there often enough to take any notice. Maybe I check it maybe once or twice a week at the most. In my LinkedIn profile, at the top of my profile says, "Do not contact me on LinkedIn. I'm not here very often. So that's, you know, if you contact me on LinkedIn, you clearly haven't read my profile.
Right.
So
and that's not a good thing.
It's not a great thing. And anyway, so I think, you know, if you do manage, of course, to get a journalist contact details, so maybe their mobile number, or you can WhatsApp them or something, this is much better done if you've actually met them, and rather than being a cold call. Unfortunately, I get a lot of cold calls from PR people, and if they call me without actually having texted me, or, you know, I kind of notice that, and I, you know, note that for the future. So,
Mike, I think we have to wrap this up, because it's 10 to 3. And please follow Mike at Mike Butcher on Twitter. My Twitter name is Cat Medias for some reason. And also listen to my podcast, Techsplain. Thank you so much, Mike, for being here with me.
My pleasure.
I'm going to say thank you to you both for this. And so don't forget also, we've got this metaverse thing. Shall I explain what this metaverse is? Because I think there's probably some confusion about the old metaverse we've built. But first of all, thank you. That was an amazing session. And I learned quite a few things myself there. And so we have a link in the top right there, which is upstart.com/Q&A. So if you have time, that'll be awesome to click it, because you'll pop up in a little 2D environment and people can sort of continue the Q&A session. And if you and Katarina and Mike can click that, then all the attendees can come and follow you there. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
I'm on the app. Where am I supposed to click? Sorry for being
Great. So on the top chat there, you've got upstart.com/Q&A. You load that in a browser window, and you just go and join ahead in there, and then you'll pop up in a little metaverse. So I'll sort of meet you over there, and all the attendees will pop over there, and then there's like a little 2D world. You can go and hang out in a speaker lounge area. And does that sound all good?
Yeah, I'm gonna try, man.
Let's do it. Let's see what happens.
Hope to see you
this
there.
metaverse stuff's pretty new, you know. Mike's actually got to talk about this coming up later. What is this metaverse about? And so we're on the cutting edge of embracing the metaverse. So see what happens. I think like we still got a way for humans to catch up with the technology, but let's see how it goes.
Okay, cool.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks everyone. Awesome session. Thanks again.
Ciao.